God, people say one thing and means another thing. Now I'm back, yo, because I quit college. That's whack, yo. Hello, everyone. My name's Stonsey Boy, and welcome back to Reading with Stonsey. Today we are reading pages 161 to 180 of Pleathrophobia. Please do not ask me what that means, for I do not truly know. This is my first video recording, being back from college, or being, I guess the word would be, quote-unquote, in college. It's kind of hard to explain, but, there's gonna be a video. I'll actually put it in the description of this video today that I make, explaining it in more detail, but I'll also tag it a shisa ton. Just to explain what the heck is happening in my life right now. Yeah, so we are reading pages 160, wait, what pages are we reading today? 161 to 180, so 20 pages as normal. Okay, cool. Some reason I thought we were reading less than that, for whatever reason. I must be going insane. So, without further ado, and I don't know if my voice is really up for reading today, but I'll make it to where it works. So without further ado, let's begin. Tate realized no one was following and turned back. Seriously, dudes, let's go. I'm staying, Grady said. I'm not, Tate said. Ronan's brows rumpled even more. We're not supposed to split up, he said, and no one is ever supposed to be here alone. So that's the protocol. It stared and highlighted in the employee's manual. Tate quirked an eyebrow at Rowan. You read that thing? Didn't you? Ronan asked. Tate flipped his fingers dismissively. I skimmed it. That means he looked at the cover, Grady said. Ronan laughed. Ha ha ha, Tate mocked. But I do know about the protocol. It's on that poster in the locker room, too. Posters, so he can read, Grady said. Ronan grinned. Whatever, Tate said. The point is that I'm leaving, and Ronan, you want to leave, so Grady has to leave. Ronan looked at Grady. Come on, Grady. He checked his watch. It's just 2 minutes to end his shift now. Grady shook his head. I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay and finish up my rounds, so I don't have to come back tomorrow. Tate sighed heavily. He slapped Ronan's arm, then pointed at Grady. Pick him up, will you? We'll just carry him out of here, and we'll lock up, and then we'll all go home. Ronan gave Tate a withering look. Tate blew out air and exasperated. That's it. I'm out of here. He looked at Ronan. And since you're my ride, you have to come too. Tate turned and strode away. Ronan again looked from Grady to Tate. Go ahead, Ronan, Grady said. I know you have your knitting club get-togethers on Friday evenings. I'll stay and finish my rounds. But, Ronan began. Grady patted Ronan's meaty shoulder. It's okay. I won't tell anyone I stayed alone, and if anyone finds out, I'll take the blame. Go. Ronan frowned. You sure? I can stay so you aren't alone. Grady smiled. You're a good guy, Ronan. But no, seriously, go. I'll be fine. Ronan hesitated for another few seconds, and Grady had to shoo him away before he disappeared around the far side of the castle-like theater, rising up from the middle of the pizzaplex. Grady exhaled and looked up, stretching for 50 feet or so over the top of the employee area and administration offices. A massive two-way mirrored expanse looked out over the entire complex. A security station was behind the glass, but it wasn't functional yet. The exterior of the pizzaplex was an active security system. No one was there to man it, and all the cameras were offline. Fazbear Entertainment was having trouble with the internal computer network. Employee records were being kept in physical files because the system had been dumped in the data. It kind of the dark ages, but apparently the programmers were working on it. A door slammed in the distance, and the pizzaplex was silent. Grady turned to the circle and gazed at the dim surroundings. Then the pizzaplex opened in a few months. It wouldn't be so dim. Nearly every game and ride of the attraction of the place is swathed in neon or LED lights. The place would be lit up like a carnival in steroids. When it was full swing, lights would glow and flash on nearly every available surface. The pizzaplex wouldn't be quiet for a few weeks either. An extensive network of speakers was wired throughout every venue of the place. When the pizzaplex opened, multiple resources of music would vie with roars and hums and dings and rides and games. The shouts and laughter of families and the screams of little kids would fill the gaps around the rest of the noise. Grady had no trouble imagining what it would be like. Now, however, the only sound Grady would hear was the huff of his own breath. The only lights were on the security lights. They cast anemic glows along the walkways and over the various attractions. During the day, it was clear outside. The sun shone through the stained glass at the top of the dome ceiling. Today, however, wasn't clear, plus it was nearing dusk. Pretty soon, most of the pizzaplex would be in shadows. The idea gave Grady the goosebumps, but then again, it didn't actually scare him. As long as he had a way out of wherever he was, Grady was fine, but he had to be locked inside. Grady shivered and quickly checked his pockets for master keys. He and every other technician carried. They excelled when he cheered the jagged metal edges and heard their comfortable jangle. Okay, he was okay. Grady lifted his clipboard and looked to its list. Grady had 2 games left to check in the arcade, skee-ball and hoops. After that, he needed to just test Balora's fitness and flex. This shouldn't take too long. The arch entrance of the arcade was only 30 feet or so from the carousel. Grady hurried down the main aisle of the arcade and reached a long row of the skee-ball machines. They were painted in bright colors and all watched over the painted wooden cutouts of Freddy's characters. According to Tate, machines number 2 and number 5 weren't working properly. Instead of fixing them, Tate had passed on the task to Grady. For the next several minutes, Grady creatively cursed Tate for his ineptitude. Grady had to check all sensors and scoring switches before he found the problem in the ball controller. Tate was an idiot. Grady finished fixing both machines and returned to the first one to play the game. The techs were supposed to play the games to be sure they didn't have any glitches. It was one of the perks of the job. Unfortunately, Tate tended to be concentrated on the playing part, and when there was a problem, he fobbed it off onto Grady or Ronan. Jerk. Grady played the game of skee-ball in both machines. They both worked perfectly, and turned off the skee-ball machines and picked up his toolkit. Taking his kit to the Chica's Shots Hoops game, Grady performed a diagnostic on it and turned it, and he would test it. The machine dinged and started blasting tiny 80s rock music. Several rubber balls that looked like round versions of various Freddy's characters' faces bounced down the slope in the front of the machine. Grady played around and managed a score of 30. He only made 15 baskets. Grady's grandmother would be embarrassed for him. He was a whiz at this game. He and his gran often went to a small arcade not far from his neighborhood. His gran was like a pro basketball player, putting up shot after shot so fast that she nearly regularly scored between 160 and 200. He was a phenomenon. Grady shook his head and shut off the machine. His score didn't matter. The machine worked fine. It was the time to move to the last venue he had to check before he could go home on a joyous weekend. He grinned and packed up his kit and slung over his shoulder. Ronan and Tate would come on Saturday and work. Meanwhile, Grady would be home munching on pretzels and playing his favorite game on his online friends. When Grady turned away from his hops game, he realized the arcade was even darker than it had been when he entered it. The sun was down, only the weak security lights created a feeble path of light past the machines. Grady followed it and main concourse through the pizza plex. There he paused and checked off the skee ball and hops on his list. He looked at the last task and sighed. All right, Ballora, he said, here I come. The entrance of Ballora's Fitness and Flex was relatively, by Fazbear Entertainment standards anyway, nondescript doorway tucked between Laser Tag Arena and the light-up area for the roller coaster. The arched doorway, unlike most brightly colored, light-wrapped entryways in the Pizzaplex, was made of natural polished wood and a carved sign above it. Beyond the doorway, a red-paned hallway sloped downward and led a long flight of stairs at alternating black and white steps. Ballora was one of the 2 venues tucked under the main level of the Pizzaplex. The only other venue was partly underground, a portion of Freddy's Fortress. The network of climbing and sliding pipes that snaked throughout the entertainment center was also below ground. Grady knew from the planning memos he and the other techs were required to read. Thankfully, he never had to check out the pipes. According to the specs he read, the maintenance robot HAPS was designed to keep the pipes safe, but Grady didn't want to be the one to test it out. He didn't want to leave the safety in the hands of the newly built robotics. Grady paused as he went to the stairs. He frowned. Wasn't that what we're going to be doing in Ballora's Fitness and Flex? The shutter skidded down Grady's spine, so he didn't want to do this. Forcing himself to get moving again, Grady followed the yellow hallway around a long curve until he reached the big arch entrance of the fitness center. Here, the LED lights and neon were evidence again, although they went on. Of course, the fitness center was nothing but a darkened maw. Grady cleared his throat and stepped into the arch, using his muted security lights to find a maintain control panel for the center. He opened the panel and flipped the switches and turned on all the lights in the area. Shining red, neon, and yellow, LED lights blinked on. White spotlights flooded the space that nearly blinding glow. Grady took a deep breath and surveyed the venue he most dreaded working on. He tried to ignore the fact that he was shaking. Ballora's Fitness and Flex was an exercise venue different from anything Grady had seen before. Like climbing a wall, it was a vertical attraction. The starting platform was 50 feet up in the air, reached by a long ladder, and an intricate series of serpentine tubes led to the platform on the floor. The tunnels were made of clear plastic. They tapered from the couple feet wide at the top and they appeared to be barely wide enough for a teenager to squeeze through the bottom. All of them were visible behind the transparent wall that enclosed them. Grady shivered. It looked like an ant farm. The idea behind the venue, Grady knew, was so force participants to wriggle and pull themselves through the tight spaces, requiring them to twist and turn and stretch themselves around the curves of the tunnels to get to the bottom. All this physical activity was designated to provide aerobatic straightening and flexibility conditioning, and theoretically, a lot of fun. Grady was more skeptical about the fun. It was a creative idea, Grady had to admit, but it was still exercise. Grady hated exercise. When Grady, Ronan, and Tate first sat down at the divvy of the list of attractions that needed to be tested, Grady had been a hard pass on Dolores. My idea of exercise would walk into my gaming chair to my fridge, he said. It doesn't sound like I'm the right person to test a fitness center. Tate lifted a brow and cocked his head at the crowd, coincided at the point. Then he gestured to Ronan. I don't think Mr. Universe here could make it through the narrow tunnels. Ronan said nodded. Unfortunately, it's designed more for kids and ordinary-sized adults. Grady had pointed to Tate. What about you? Tate tossed up his hands in insecure apology. Bad knees, I'm afraid, and I'm a lot taller than you are. It makes a lot more sense for you to do it. Grady had shaken his head. I hate small spaces, he realized, as soon as he knew the words that come out in a whiny voice, as if his 5-year-old self had piped up to protest. He cleared his throat. Tate poked Ronan on the shoulder. I bet Ronan's not a fan of them either since he didn't fit in them, Tate chuckled. It had taken every ounce of will Grady had not to launch himself across the table they sat at, wrap his hands around Tate's throat. Then Grady had faced off with Tate look-alike in the past. He'd been too young to do anything but cry, but he was bigger, and he would have throttled Tate if he didn't mind going to jail. Grady shook his head, bringing himself back to Dolores' fitness and flex. His legs suddenly felt shaky. Grady sat down cross-legged on the bright yellow tiled floor and pulled out a candy bar he stashed in his tool kit. Under the needle-nosed pliers, they weren't supposed to eat on the job. Food was only allowed in an employee break room, but the heck with the rules. When Grady got hungry, he needed to eat, and when he got scared, Grady unwrapped the bar and bit into the chocolate and nougat. He immediately felt the anxiety ease. Food has always been his comfort. It was amazing, Grady thought, how patterns established in childhood stayed into adulthood. Grady was almost 28 years old, and his daily reactions were nearly all dictated by experiences he made when he was little. The food, for example, and his biggest fear. Grady choked on a little bite of candy as he looked up to the meandering tunnels in front of him. He felt a trickle of sweat run down his side. Grady closed his eyes. He tried to calm his breathing. It had just been one evening of his life, 6 hours and 13 minutes. That was all. Grady did the math in his head. Of roughly 15 million minutes he'd been alive, the 373 minutes of this ordeal was just the infinitesimal percentage of the totality of his experience. But the impact of it, that was another story. When Grady was little, his parents had loved to dance. They didn't dance much now. His dad had slipped disc, and his mom had never fully recovered from a broken ankle. But 23 years ago, at least 3 or 4 times a week, Grady's parents had gone to a dance studio to practice for amateur dance contests. This meant Grady was left with a lot of babysitters. It wasn't like Grady's parents were bad parents or anything. When she wasn't dancing, his mom stayed home and took care of him. He always had milk and cookies waiting for him when he got home from school. She usually took him on a park or let him have a play date before dinner. And his dad worked a normal 9 to 5. When he played with Grady during the evenings, he and Grady's mom were out dancing. They weren't neglectful. They were both just discerning when it came to choosing babysitters. At least, not that one night. Grady's regular babysitter had been available. They had hired a girl they'd never used before. She had been recommended by a friend. As it turns out, the friend was a very attentive mother that didn't really care who was taking care of her kid. Frances seemed nice enough that when she had arrived that night, she was cute and perky, and she smiled at Grady and asked him the tower of blocks he was building in front of the fireplace. She told him that they'd play a lot of fun games while his parents were out. Right after his parents left, Frances made him a peanut butter sandwich. Grady had been halfway through his sandwich when the doorbell rang. Grady heard Frances' delighted giggle when she opened the door and wondered what she was so happy about. He hoped that she'd be happy about it too, but he wasn't. When Frances returned to the living room, he took a teenage boy in tow. A boy dressed in baggy shorts and flowered sloppy shirt, was tall and skinny, and had scraggly long blonde hair. Thinking about it now, Grady thought it was uncanny how much Tate resembled the boy who had showed up that night, the boy that had been Tate's cocky grin, and when he arrived that evening, he had considered to use the grin on Grady. As soon as she spotted Grady, the boy gave Grady a dismissive glance and then grabbed Frances and kissed her. Grady had looked away and he didn't like to watch kissing. This is Boone, Frances said and told Grady. Boone, this is Grady. Boone had ignored Grady and kissed Frances again. Then Frances had giggled and half pushed Boone away. She didn't look like she really meant it. Boone had looked down at Grady. You like hide and seek, kid? Boone had asked. Grady, looking for peanut butter off the roof of his mouth, nodded eagerly. Good, Boone said. Then weirdly, Boone had disappeared down the hall. Grady didn't know much about 5 years old, but he knew he wasn't nice to wander around someone else's house. He once tried to do that when his mom took him out to visit a friend. When Grady wandered off and explored the unfamiliar surroundings, his mom had called him back. It's not polite to look around other people's houses without their permission, she told him. That was what Boone was doing. Grady could hear Boone opening and closing doors. Grady was going to tell on Boone when his mom got home. Boone finally returned, and when she did, he held out a hand. He finally smiled at Grady. Grady jumped up, forgetting all about Boone's bad behavior. Grady was ready to play. Boone took Grady's hand and led him to the living room. Grady wasn't sure what was going to happen next because hide and seek didn't usually start with a hand holding, but he wasn't long when Boone walked down the hall into the linen closet. When they got to the closet, Boone opened the closet door. Before Grady could react, Boone shoved Grady under the bottom shelf of the closet. You hide here, Boone said. The area under the bottom shelf wasn't big, and it wasn't empty. His mom kept packages of toilet paper stuck under the shelf. There was barely enough room for Grady to squeeze in next to the puffy rolls. Grady opened his mouth to ask how Grady would win the game if Boone already knew where he was hiding. He didn't get the words out, though. Boone didn't give him a chance. Boone shut off the door, leaving Grady in a tiny dark space. Now, Boone said, his voice muffled at the door. We can seek for some fun times, Boone laughed, and Francis giggled. Grady had immediately kicked the door. Hey, he called, let me out. Boone's laugh and Francis' giggle answered his cry. Both the laugh and the giggle came from further away. Grady called out to them again, and when they didn't answer, he tried to reach up to the front of the shelf and open the doorknob. His arm was skinny, and the space was the shelf of the door was even skinnier. Grady started to cry as the edge of the wood shelf scraped his bare arm. He cried even harder when he realized he wouldn't reach high enough to grasp the doorknob. Grady tried to pull back his arm back down, but he couldn't. It was stuck. That's when Grady started screaming. That's when the 373 minutes started. The fact that Grady was able to count 373 at the age of 5 was pretty amazing. His parents later told him, at the time though, he had no idea he was doing something clever, and whenever he thought about it later, he would wish he hadn't had to do it. Grady knew that it was 373 minutes because he learned the tell time the week before, and his parents had given him a big orange watch, the time that old-fashioned clock face, not with the kind with just numbers, as a reward for how fast he learned. The watch had glow-in-the-dark hands that he'd used at night. Thanks to those hands, Grady could see the minutes going by even in the near darkness of the closet. After his initial panic, Grady had managed to change his position, pull his arm down a little. He couldn't get it completely unstuck. Later, when he was older, he realized that his arm was swollen when it got scraped and bruised on the way up. When he was 5, though, all he knew was his arm really hurt and he was trapped in the dark, and he was terrified. The air in his linen closet smelled like his mother. It was really flowery and sweet. It wasn't a bad smell, but Grady's nose itched. It reminded him of how his mother, who had been there to help him, somehow smelling her but knowing she wasn't there made everything worse. Grady screamed and screamed and screamed. He was so scared. Why wouldn't Boone and Francis let him out? No matter how much he shrieked, they didn't come. Grady screamed for 62 of the 373 minutes. Eventually, though, the screams and the fact that the peanut butter had made him thirsty closed up his throat. From that point, he could only concentrate on trying to breathe. By then, his nose was stuffed up from crying. He couldn't get a full breath of air. He thought he was going to die. Grady didn't remember a lot about this ordeal at the point on. The point that he could remember well was watching a big hand of the orange-faced clock move from 1 minute mark to the next. According to Grady's mother, she and Grady's dad had come home half an hour earlier when they said they would. They found Francis and Boone asleep on the couch together. When Boone finally admitted where he stashed Grady, the boy had been barely conscious. Grady hadn't spoken for days after that. Grady never found out exactly what happened to Francis and Boone. He just knew his friends were pressing charges at the time. Grady wasn't sure what it meant, but he hoped it hurt Francis and Boone a lot. When all was said and done, the only injury Grady got from this time in the closet was a sprained wrist and a sore throat. From the unseen damage to this real problem, he was in therapy for months before he'd let anyone close to his bedroom door. He even had issues with the parents closing and locking doors of the house, and the car was worse. Soon, any small space was a problem. Those months had been hard on Grady and his parents. Sometimes they acted as they felt guilty about what had happened, and sometimes they acted exasperated by Grady's problems. The only good thing Grady could remember about those months was the parents let him eat a lot of food they never let him have before. They brought him whatever candy or chips other junk he wanted. The food had distracted him from his fears. Recently, Grady's mom had told him it was her fault that he was addicted to junk food. She'd been so relieved that he'd sit in front of the TV and eat instead of freaking out and watch closed doors that she let him eat as much as he wanted. By the time Grady had graduated from high school, Grady still loved junk food. He was reasonably functional for most situations. He could manage small rooms and cars as long as he knew the way to get out. Grady blinked and looked at the candy wrapper. It was empty. He checked his watch. 10 minutes had passed. He took a shaky breath. It had been a long time since he let himself think about getting locked up in the linen closet. Of course, he'd think of it now. He looked up at the narrow, squiggly tubes. He shuddered. Maybe he would just say he tested it. Grady balled up at the candy wrapper and sighed. No, he couldn't do that. Kids were going to be in those tubes, and they were defective in any way. It was Grady's job to find the defects and fix them. It wasn't going to be responsible, even partly, for anyone going through the trauma like he did when he was stuck in the closet. Grady tucked his candy wrapper in the kit and zipped the kit's top closed. He looked at it. The toolkit wasn't going to do him much good here. If someone was wrong with Belora herself, he could use the tools to fix her, but he would find out whether she functioned properly. He'd have to go through the tubes. It was going to be hard enough to squeeze the body through them without bringing his toolkit along. Grady left it on the floor and stood. He brushed himself off and steeled himself for what he had to do. Finally, Grady walked over to the ladder. He might as well get it over with. Grady grasped the smooth, round sides of the ladder and placed his foot in the first rung. He looked down at the step and was pleased to see it was wide and a tread for gripping in the bottom shoes. He held on the sides of the ladder and leaned the weight backward. The ladder didn't move at all. It was sturdy. Good. Grady tilted his head back and looked up. His resolve wavered. The ladder was tall, very tall. From his perspective, it looked like it went up forever and ever. Grady could barely see the top. Grady let go of the ladder and wiped his suddenly sweaty palms at the front of his shirt. He took a deep breath and grasped the ladder again. Before he let himself think any more, he began climbing. Only after a dozen or so rungs, Grady had winded. After another dozen, sweat had beaded from his forehead. Another dozen, he was gasping and he had to stop. He clung to the ladder, gulping in air. Grady looked up. He wasn't far from the top, but his legs felt like jelly and his knees were throbbing. He snorted at the thought of Tate's bad knees, suddenly cursing his co-worker. Grady grounded his teeth. Grady's annoyance gave him a burst of energy. He took a deep breath and he started climbing again. This time he forced himself to keep going until he reached the top. When Grady crawled onto the broad rubber-floored platform at the top of the network of tubes, he was once again sucking in air. He used his shirt to wipe up his sweat-soaked face. Grady looked at the ray of tubes extending downward from the platform. He had to admit they looked plenty big enough for him to get through. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. It was just 50 feet from the top of the tube network and the floor. It wouldn't take long to get through it. Grady craned his neck and examined the path of the tube nearest him. He frowned. Maybe it would take longer than he thought. The problem was the tubes didn't just go straight down. They were bent left and right and looped around, crisscrossing in other tubes, backtracking and zigzagging. The travel distance from the platform to the floor had just been 3 to 4 times longer than just 50 feet. Grady heaved a long sigh. The sound seemed so well around him, mocking him for his hesitation. "Are you a man or a mouse?" Grady asked himself. He immediately laughed. It would be better if he was a mouse at this point. Too bad he wouldn't turn himself into one just to scurry around the tubes double time and get this done. "Come on, Grady," he urged himself. "Move it." Grady edged himself towards the nearest tube. He peered into the opening. Still, he hesitated. He was just getting ready to bend down into the tube when the click and whoosh startled him into immobility. He whipped his head around and watched wide-eyed as the torso of Ballora, the animatronic mascot of the fitness venue, popped out of the hole in platform. Her long eyelashes fluttered as she turned her metal head and aimed her purple eyes at Grady. "Hello, hello, welcome here," Ballora sang in her sweet yet raspy woman's voice. "It's time to play, nothing to fear." Ballora's low ditty was in minor key, and he dropped down to the end of each phrase, and it was no way reassured him. Grady had found it kind of haunting. Ballora spun in a circle and faced Grady again. "I'm happy you're here," she spurred. "I will help you get fit." This time she didn't sing, she just spoke. Grady liked that better. Grady had only seen sketches of Ballora before now. She was much more impressive in person. Ballora was an animatronic designed to look like a ballerina. In the sketches Grady had seen, Ballora wore a blue leotard and tutu. And this version of Ballora had just been an upper body, which is attached to a robotic mechanism and moved her throughout the exercise venue. She was pretty in a weirdly robotic way. Ballora had blue hair caught up with a bun and held it with what looked like a fan-shaped flamenco dancer-style comb, all this actually painted metal. Like most of Fazbear Entertainment's animatronics, Ballora had more teeth than Grady thought were necessary. However, the teeth were tempered somewhat with a pink blush on Ballora's sculpted cheeks. Ballora's endoskeleton was made of a combination of metal, thick rubber, encased wires, and ranged and assembled musculature. Her limbs were articulated so she could move with the grace of the dancer. In most of the sketches, Ballora stood with her arms lifted gracefully over her head, but right now they were thrown out of their sides and making grand welcoming gesture. "I encourage you to slide on in," Ballora began singing again. "It's the best way to begin." Grady really didn't like Ballora's tune. "Stop singing," Grady said. "I don't like the singing." He was going to have to make a note of the tune the programmers. It was far too sinister. Ballora sent again her servo's word, and when she stopped, Grady heard a metallic clink. He wondered if that was normal. He made a note of that too. "Please try the tube," Ballora said. "I'm here to help you get to the bottom." "Yeah," Grady said doubtfully. "What can you do with help?" "I'm here to make sure you don't get stuck." The word made of little hairs on the back of Grady's neck stand right upright. He felt them bristle against his skin. She didn't just go to say the word stuck. That was, of course, Grady's biggest fear. Grady's heart pounded. It was taking everything she had not to scramble back to the ladder and flee from the fitness center. Maybe he could just quit his job. Though I wouldn't tell people to do that myself. I guess if your job is that scary, maybe that's an option for some people. Just quit the job. I mean, if you work construction, I think that would make a lot of sense. Like, if you were in a big accident, you were injured on the site, and yeah, you just want to quit, call it after that. I mean, heck, that's reasonable, but I think for this situation, it may be a little over dramatic. Then again, Grady, our good friend Grady's probably gonna die, so maybe not. What I do know is that today we read pages 161 to 180. Next time we'll be reading pages 181 to 200. It's the last of this book that's gonna be normal, and yeah, that should be good. I think it should be a good time to look up what cleithrophobia is. I believe it would be the fear of type spaces or the fear of being trapped. Okay, so that makes sense. Who is calling me at this hour? No one important. Okay, cool. Sorry, it was like potential spam. Ooh, so I didn't know who it was. What I do know is it's time for Reading Corner of the Day, doing it up Stonsey's way, Bob. Today we are learning about the Black Russian Terror. The Russian Terror. Whew, whew. Help your brothers fight today. Does anyone remember that? Black Ops 3 Zombies. Ooh, I love that map. That map is so good. The one where you play as an 80s characters and ooh, you're in an arcade. Oh, I love that stuff. That stuff was fun. I should get Black Ops again if it wasn't for $60. Oh man, look at this dog. He's so fluffy and silly looking. Got a big old tongue by the picture, but by that, he just looks fluffy and a little silly. But before I can make fun of anything, or have a strong opinion on something, especially something I'm passionate about, or in government, I should learn of its history. Not only does it build my credibility, make me look smarter in front of my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, or my little teddy bear with a graduation hat and a little diploma. I don't know where he graduated from, but whatever. I guess he's special. But it also is just good to have. Now, and it makes you more intelligent, but intelligence doesn't necessarily lie in knowing things, though I guess it does by the broad term. It also true intelligence comes from learning things and teaching it to others. It can be simple as just bringing it up in conversation, or maybe even just talking about it to a person or teaching it to people, like how I do it to y'all. The smartest people you ever meet are teachers, doctors, and just people like that who learn things and teach it to others, though I understand there are some bad doctors or some bad teachers, but we are all but human. The history of the Black Russian Terror, and it's weird, I feel like I'm not speaking loud enough, so I'm sorry. But, I don't know, it's been a second since I've read, so I'm trying to get back in the mojo, you know. The history of the Black Russian Terror is that in the 1940s, the Soviets faced the task of populating the military with suitable working dogs. With dearth and qualified canines, they imported breeds from their occupied countries, mainly German breeds, into their state Red Star kennels. The most impressive of their imports was a giant schnauzer named Roy, born in 1947. Roy was bred extensively with females from various breeds, with the most successful coming from Airedale Terrier, Rottweiler, and Moscow Water Dog crosses. They were all black, and were distinguished from the others as the Black Terrier group. The best were bred among themselves, and by 1957, second and third generation dogs were presented to the public, and the first puppies went to family breeding situations to continue the project. The main criteria were working ability and versatility, but care was also taken to improve the conformation. Besides sharing border guard duty with soldiers, military tasks including detecting mines and explosives, transporting supplies, pulling sledges and finding wounded soldiers, all done independently with the harshest of climates. Black Russian Terriers served in the military operations in Afghanistan and Bosnia in 1968. The breed standard was registered in the International FCI, or the Federal Federal Company Incorporated. I think that's what FCI stands for. With officially recognized the breed in 1984 as BRT breeders emigrated to other countries. The dog's value as companions became more obvious and more popularity spread. In 2001, the American Kennel Company, or AKC, admitted the breed into its miscellaneous. Why did I say malicious? Miscellaneous class. In 2004, it became a regular member of the working group. Wow. So this dog isn't too far away. Though 21 years, I guess, is pretty long. Ooh, I was born in 2006. I'm old. But what if you want this dog? Well, what if I want a Soviet Union dog in my house? I want the Black Russian Terrier in my house. I'm just trying to voice Heavy from TF2. Well, what's the temperament? Are they good with kids? Or will they stop the enemy from getting through the gate, or the front door, or the apartment door? Either or. Well, the temperament of the Black Russian Terrier is that they're calm, confident, and courageous, sums up the Black Russian Terrier. Reserved with strangers, BRTs are very attached and protective of their families. They're fast learners, but also independent thinkers, and they are stubborn if pushed to do something they don't want to do. BRTs are affectionate and social. They tend to stick close to their people, Even inside the house, they are gentle and playful with children. They may not be good with strange and dominant dogs, but are fine with other pets and smart canine housemates. So can destroy the American Terror on the outside, but it's good with kids on the inside. The Black Russian Terrier. What's the upkeep? How do I keep this dog up and running and good and protecting my kids while also being kind? Well, the upkeep of the Black Russian Terrier is that BRTs need, or Black Russian Terrier, I should say that BRT and Black Russian Terrier are the same thing, needs social interaction as well as a mental and physical exercise. Obedience or agility and training is helpful in channeling the breeds need to work. BRTs do not need to do well as kennel dogs because they seek to need human contact. They are quiet inside. They do not bark frivolously. The BRT doesn't shed much. Its coat needs thorough combing once or twice a week, and it needs trimming every 6 to 8 weeks. A showed trim is carefully done to show off the dog's conformation without giving it a sculpted look. The coat should appear tousled. Ah! Ow! Ow! Is one of my teeth bleeding? Ah! You ever get that? Where all of a sudden your tooth just starts aching? A toothache, if you would. Maybe, maybe not. I've been brushing my teeth every day. I've been a good boy, Mr. Dental. Mr. Sandman, don't take my teeth. Or the Tooth Fairy, whichever it is. Does the Tooth Fairy magically take the teeth? That might be a video in and of itself. The history of the Tooth Fairy. Well, alright, so, if you are a child, please cover your ears and now think about the Tooth Fairy, I guess. If you are an adult or a teenager who owns a Black Russian Terrier, please get your notebook, because we're about to talk about the health of them, their major concerns, minor concerns, what they're occasionally seen with, their suggested tests when you take them to the doctor, and their lifespan. So, yep. For the health of the Black Russian Terrier, their major concerns are CHD, minor concerns are elbow dysplasia, which is surprising because this isn't a very tall-looking dog, though I could be wrong. They're occasionally seen with PRA and dwarfism. Again, they don't look tall. Their suggested tests are hip, elbow, and eye, and their lifespan is 10 to 11 years. Now imagine you don't see this dog in front of you. What does it do? How does it run around, and what does it look like? Well, the Black Russian Terrier the form and function of the Black Russian Terrier, it must be strong of body and mind to perform its duty as a reliable guard and military dog. This is a large-boned and well-muscled dog, capable of pulling a heavy load, yet having the agility to traverse rocky terrain or overtake an adversary. The head and neck are powerful. A reliable, intelligent temperament is essential in the dog that is also has strong protective instincts. Courage is also a must. The weatherproof outer coat repels water. The undercoat insulates the dog to the cold. Length of the coat should vary from 1.5 to 4, with longer coats detracting from the dog's working ability. Now for the tier list in the final section of this episode. 5 is the best, 4 is better, 3 is average, 2 is worse, and 1 is the worst unless it comes to grooming. But I don't think we're going to be spared. This is a very fluffy dog. Energy levels at a 2, so lower than average. Exercise requirements at a 3, so pretty average. Playfulness is at a 2, so lower than average. Affection levels at a 4. Friendliness towards dogs is at a 3. Friendliness towards other pets is at a 4, so pretty high. Friendliness towards strangers is at a 1. They don't like the things they don't understand. Freeze of training is at a 3. Watchdog and protection ability are both at a 5, so pretty good. Grooming requirements is at a 3, so pretty bad. Cold tolerance may be at a 4, but heat tolerance is at a 2, so they can take the cold, but not the heat. The weight, the healthy weight of a male and female Black Russian Terrier should be 80 to 145 pounds. Oh my. And the height should be 27, of a male Black Russian Terrier should be 27 to 30 inches, or 26 to 29 if female. Because if they were feet, we'd be living in a world of giants. Straight and to the point. I like this next breed of dog, which is the one you'll learn about in the next episode. So, I hope you guys have a fantastic, wonderful day. These are fat dogs, but I think it's their coat that really gets them. I have to remember that when it comes to dogs of this nature, it's usually their coats that make them more weighted. I guess if you keep it trimmed, they would be lower weight. But if it says that the AKC doesn't allow it, then I wouldn't suggest doing it. That's just me, though. And yeah. Hope you guys have a fantastic, wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time.